Birthdays are supposed to be special. They're supposed to remind us that we matter, that the people we love most in this world are grateful for our existence. For me, birthdays were never about gifts or parties. They were about one thing: being surrounded by my children, hearing their laughter and feeling the warmth of family. But this year was different. This year became the day that broke me. I remember standing in front of my mirror that evening, fixing the same pearl earrings I had worn on my wedding day. They were old now, but they made me feel elegant. I had taken out my best blue dress. Not flashy, just simple and soft, the kind of dress my late husband always said made my eyes look brighter. I looked at myself and whispered, "Tonight will be special. My family will be here." I had booked the reservation a week in advance. A quiet corner table at a restaurant I loved, one with dim lights, soft music, and food that reminded me of the old days when we used to go out as a family. I told my children, Mark, the eldest, then Sarah and Daniel. They all agreed. "Of course, Mom," Sarah had said over the phone. "We wouldn't miss it." So I arrived early. The restaurant smelled of warm bread and roasted herbs. I asked the waiter if they could put a small candle on the dessert at the end. "It's my birthday," I told him, smiling like a little girl. He nodded kindly, making me feel noticed, important. I sat at the table, my hands folded on my lap. At first I was calm, even excited. I looked around as couples, families, and groups of friends filled the room. Each time the door opened, I straightened in my chair, expecting to see familiar faces. "They'll be here any minute," I told myself. 30 minutes passed. I ordered water, thinking maybe traffic was holding them up. After an hour, I asked the waiter to wait a little longer before bringing the menus. I kept glancing at my phone. No calls. No texts. Just silence. As the second hour crept by, the waiter's eyes grew more sympathetic. I could feel other diners noticing me too. A woman sitting alone at a decorated table, smiling at the door that never opened for her. My heart began to pound with a heavy mix of embarrassment and fear. I told myself stories to calm the sting. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe they were late because they had stopped to buy flowers or a cake. Maybe the kids had mixed up the time. But deep down I knew. I knew that if they cared, they would have at least called. By the third hour, the restaurant had filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and conversations that felt like a cruel contrast to my silence. My table was the only one without company, without joy. I tried to keep my chin up to hide the tears that kept threatening to spill. Finally, as the waiter came over and asked softly, "Would you like to order, ma'am?" I forced a smile and shook my head. "No thank you. Just pack this up for me." I handed him the cake box I had brought. A chocolate cake with "Happy Birthday, Mom" written in white icing. I had imagined my children singing to me as we cut it together. Instead, I walked out of the restaurant with it unopened, the candle inside and used. The night air felt colder than it should have. My heels clicked on the pavement as I carried that cake like a weight of disappointment. Cars passed, people laughed, but I felt invisible. Forgotten. When I got home, I placed the cake on the kitchen counter and stared at it. The silence of the house was unbearable. I pulled out 3 plates, imagining how I had planned to serve each of my children. Then I pushed them back, my hands trembling. I finally broke down. I cried like a child, loud, messy, heart-wrenching sobs that came from the deepest part of me. It wasn't just about the dinner. It wasn't even about the cake. It was about everything I had given, every sacrifice, every sleepless night when they were sick, every shift I had worked to pay their fees, every time I had put them first and myself last. And now, on the one day that was supposed to be about me, I sat alone. That night, I fell asleep on the couch with swollen eyes, the untouched cake still on the counter. I told myself maybe something had gone wrong. Maybe there had been a mistake, maybe they would explain tomorrow. But in my heart, a seed of doubt had already been planted. Something was deeply wrong, and the truth was about to cut deeper than I ever imagined. The morning after my lonely birthday dinner, I woke up to a house that felt even emptier than usual. My head was heavy, my eyes swollen, and the cake still sat untouched on the counter like a cruel reminder of the night before. I almost wished I had thrown it in the trash, but part of me couldn't let go. It wasn't just sugar and frosting. It was proof of what I had hoped for and how badly those hopes had been shattered. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitter taste doing little to comfort me. I kept glancing at my phone, expecting, no, praying, for a message from one of them. "Sorry, Mom, something came up. We'll make it up to you." Anything at all to show that they had remembered. But there was nothing. Not even a missed call. By mid-morning I forced myself to get dressed and go outside. Staying in the house with that silence pressing down on me was unbearable. I decided to run a few errands trying to distract myself. At the grocery store I smiled politely at the cashier, but she tilted her head with a kind of pity that made me feel like she knew. Like she could see through me. It wasn't until I got back home and settled onto the sofa with the television on low that the real blow came. My phone buzzed with a notification. Sarah had posted new photos on social media. Normally I would smile and scroll through them, but something made me freeze before opening. With trembling fingers I tapped the screen. My heart dropped. There they were, all three of my children, their spouses, their kids, and even a few cousins. They were gathered around a long dining table, a birthday banner hanging in the background, balloons floating above. In the center of the table sat a cake. Not mine. A different one. A bigger one. They were celebrating my birthday, without me. I stared at the photos in disbelief. Sarah's caption read, "So grateful for family time. Happy birthday, Mom. Couldn't have asked for a better night." My vision blurred with tears. Better night? Better than what? Better than sitting alone at a restaurant with a cake no one touched? Better than leaving your mother waiting in public humiliation? Comment after comment from their friends praised them. What a beautiful family. Happy birthday to your mom. She's so lucky to have you all. The words cut like knives. Lucky. If only they knew the truth. I set the phone down, my hands shaking. I felt heat rise in my chest, a mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. My children, the ones I had sacrificed everything for, had chosen to celebrate me in my absence. They hadn't just forgotten. They had deliberately excluded me. Memories flooded back, uninvited and sharp. Mark as a boy, crying when he couldn't afford a school trip, and me working double shifts at the hospital to pay for it. Sarah, heartbroken after her first breakup, and me holding her all night as she wept. Daniel, struggling with college fees, and me selling the last piece of jewelry my husband had given me to cover the cost. Every single time I had been there. And now when it was my turn they turned their backs. I sat there for hours replaying the images in my head, trying to make sense of it. Maybe they thought I wouldn't enjoy a loud family party. Maybe they thought the restaurant was too expensive. Maybe they just didn't care. Each excuse I made only crumbled under the weight of reality. If they had wanted me there, I would have been there. That night I didn't cry like before. Instead, a cold, still silence settled inside me. I wasn't numb, I was awake. I realized something with a clarity that burned. I had been living in an illusion. I had believed that my sacrifices bound us together, that love was enough to ensure respect. But love without respect is nothing but chains. And I was tired of being chained. The next morning I saw my neighbor Mrs. Patel tending her garden. She waved at me warmly, and something in her kind eyes made me stop. She asked me how my birthday had gone, and the words nearly stuck in my throat. But then I told her. Every detail. She listened quietly, her face tightening with sympathy and then anger. "You don't deserve that," she said firmly. "Not after everything you've done. Don't let them treat you like this." Her words stayed with me. For years I had brushed off my children's selfishness. The ignored calls, the missed visits, the times they only came by when they needed money. I had excused it all, telling myself they were busy, that times were different, that I should be patient. But this, celebrating my birthday without me, was not just neglect. It was betrayal. I went back inside, stood in front of the mirror again, and looked at myself. This time I didn't see a mother waiting for scraps of affection. I saw a woman who had been pushed aside for too long. And I whispered something new: never again. It was then, in that quiet, angry moment, that a seed of resolve began to grow. I didn't yet know what I would do or how, but I knew this: I would not beg. I would not plead. And I would not let them forget the pain they had caused. My birthday had been the night I lost my family, but it was also the night I found myself. In the days that followed, I found myself walking through life like a shadow. On the outside I moved as usual, buying groceries, tidying the house, watering the plants. But inside I was burning. That night at the restaurant and those photos on Sarah's page replayed in my mind endlessly, each image sharpening the edges of my pain. For the first time in my life I stopped calling my children. Normally I was the one who reached out, checking on their kids, asking if they needed anything, offering to babysit or cook. But now my phone stayed on the counter, untouched. I waited to see if any of them would notice my silence. None of them did. The only messages I received were practical ones. A quick text from Mark. "Mom, can you send me that casserole recipe?" Sarah asking, "Do you still have the old crib in the attic? We might need it." Daniel, always short and hurried. "Do you have $200 to spare until Friday?" Not a single word about the dinner. Not a single apology. Not even a hint of guilt. That told me everything I needed to know. To them, I wasn't a mother anymore. I was a resource. A bank account. A storage unit. A free babysitter. Someone to call when they needed and to discard when they didn't. One night, I sat at the kitchen table with a stack of old bills and documents spread out before me. I thought back to the years when I had juggled 3 jobs while my children slept peacefully in warm beds I had fought to provide. I remembered the exhaustion etched into my bones, the way I used to collapse on the couch but still rise the next morning with a smile for them. I remembered pawning my wedding jewelry, the last link to the man I had loved, just to keep Mark in university. I realized something then. All those sacrifices had not taught them gratitude. They had taught them entitlement. The more I gave, the more they expected. The more I forgave, the bolder their neglect became. I closed my eyes and whispered to myself, "This ends now." From that moment I began to change. Quietly, without announcement. I stopped answering every call. I stopped opening my wallet at the first request. I started saying no. Small no's at first, careful ones. "Sorry, I don't have that amount right now." "No, I can't babysit this weekend." Each refusal felt strange, almost guilty, but also liberating. I noticed how quickly their tones shifted. Polite words turned sharp. Gratitude turned into frustration. Mark once snapped, "Come on, Mom, what else are you going to do with your money? You're not getting any younger." Sarah sighed dramatically on the phone, saying, "You used to be so helpful, but now..." Daniel simply stopped calling altogether. Instead of breaking me, their reactions hardened me. Every word, every sigh, every unspoken accusation, they fueled a fire I had never allowed myself to feel. For years I had been afraid of losing them. Afraid that if I set boundaries they would turn away. But hadn't they already abandoned me? Hadn't they already shown me exactly how much, or how little, I meant to them? That clarity gave me strength. I began writing everything down. Every time they asked for money. Every time they ignored me. Every time they used me. Not because I needed a record, but because I wanted to face the truth without excuses. For the first time I stopped telling myself comforting lies. Mrs. Patel, my neighbor, noticed the change. "You look different," she said one afternoon as we shared tea in her garden. "Not sadder. Stronger." I smiled faintly. "I've just opened my eyes." She nodded as if she understood. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes family isn't who you're born to. Sometimes it's who shows up for you when no one else does." Her words lingered in me. And I realized she was right. If my own children had chosen to leave me behind, then maybe I needed to stop chasing them. Maybe I needed to build a different kind of family. One that valued me. But before I could move forward, I knew I had to protect myself. All these years I had let my children believe everything I owned, everything I had worked for, would one day belong to them. They assumed it as their right. But that night at the restaurant showed me something important. They didn't deserve it. And so I began planning. Not in anger but in resolve. I pulled out my old financial files, my bank statements, my property deeds. I started making quiet appointments. With my lawyer, with my accountant, with people who had no reason to betray me. Step by step I laid the groundwork. To the outside world I was still the same woman. Soft-spoken, motherly, always polite. But inside I was no longer waiting for scraps of love. I was preparing. Preparing for the day when my children would realize what they had lost. The first time I walked into the lawyer's office, I felt as though the air itself was heavier. The polished wooden walls, the shelves lined with thick books, the faint smell of paper and ink. It all carried the weight of decisions that changed lives. I had come to make one of those decisions. The receptionist smiled kindly as she led me in. "Mrs. Miller, he's ready for you." I stepped into a room with wide windows that overlooked the town. My lawyer, Mr. Lawson, stood to greet me. He had handled my affairs for years. A calm man with graying hair, glasses perched low on his nose, and a way of speaking that made even the most complicated legal terms sound simple. "How can I help you today?" he asked, motioning for me to sit. I took a deep breath. "I need to update my will." His eyebrows lifted slightly. Of course. Any particular changes? I hesitated. Saying it out loud felt like tearing something out of myself, but it was necessary. I don't want my children to inherit anything. There was a long pause. He studied me carefully. Are you certain about that? Yes, I said firmly, though my voice quivered at the edges. They've made it clear where I stand in their lives. And I want to make it equally clear where they stand in mine. He nodded slowly, pulling a legal pad toward him. Then who will be the beneficiaries? I had thought about this for days, nights even, unable to sleep. My children had treated me like a bank, a servant, an afterthought. But there were others, people who had shown kindness when they didn't have to. Mrs. Patel, my neighbor who always looked out for me. The church group that had brought me food when I was ill last winter. Even charities that helped struggling families, the kind I once had been. I want it divided, I said. Half to charity. Half to a neighbor who's been like family to me. Mr. Lawson scribbled notes. And your children? Nothing, I whispered. Not a cent. As the words left my mouth, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't vengeance, not entirely. It was justice. A balance finally restored. Over the following weeks, I visited the office several times. We went over every detail. The house, my savings, even the small heirlooms I had once planned to pass down. Each item was carefully reassigned. Each signature I made felt like another stone lifted from my chest. Meanwhile, I maintained the same face at home. To my children, nothing seemed different. I still answered when they called, though less frequently. I still smiled when they visited, though their visits were rare. And when they hinted about the future, I let them believe what they wanted. One Sunday, Mark stopped by, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. Mom, you've still got that property deed, right? The house will go to us one day, won't it? I looked at him, keeping my face neutral. Why do you ask? He shrugged. Just planning ahead. You know, for the kids. I smiled faintly. Of course. He left satisfied, never realizing the truth had already been sealed in documents he would never see until it was too late. Sarah was more direct. Mom, you should really think about setting aside money for us. Funerals, inheritances. These things matter. It's part of your legacy. I nodded, pretending to listen even as I thought. My legacy is not for you. Daniel hardly bothered with subtlety. One evening he called and said, Mom, you've got good savings, right? Just make sure none of it goes to waste. You know we'll take care of it when the time comes. I almost laughed at the irony. Take care of it? You couldn't even take care of me on my birthday. The more they revealed their greed, the more certain I became. But setting the will was only part of the plan. I wanted them to feel the consequences while I was still alive. Not after I was gone. I wanted them to see what it meant to underestimate me. So I started small. I stopped giving them money no matter how convincing their stories were. I can't, Mark, I said when he asked for a loan to cover his business expenses. I just don't have it right now. He frowned but said nothing. When Sarah hinted about needing help for her children's school fees, I shook my head gently. I'm sorry, dear. Things are tight. Her lips tightened. And when Daniel asked for a down payment on a new car, I simply said, no. For the first time they were forced to stand on their own feet. And I could see the cracks forming. Their tones grew colder, their visits fewer. Yet strangely I didn't feel weaker. I felt stronger. Each rejection was a boundary, a line I had never drawn before. Still I kept the ultimate truth hidden. To them I was still the aging mother who would one day leave everything behind for them. They believed they were secure. They believed they were clever. They believed I was weak. But the trap was already set, and the day of reckoning was drawing closer with every breath. The day of the reveal came sooner than I expected. It wasn't my doing, it was theirs. Mark had invited everyone over for a family dinner. It was rare for him to host anything, so at first I was surprised. But deep down I knew. It wasn't about family. It was about money. When I arrived at his house, the table was already set. Sarah and Daniel were there with their spouses, laughter floating in the air like they had nothing to hide. The children ran through the halls, squealing, while the adults sat with wine glasses in hand. Mom, Sarah said brightly, hugging me as though we hadn't gone weeks without a real conversation. So glad you could make it. Daniel kissed my cheek. You look good, Mom. Healthy. Mark, ever the showman, clapped his hands. All right, let's eat. We've got a lot to talk about tonight. Something in his tone sent a shiver down my spine. I sat quietly as dinner was served, watching them exchange glances, waiting for the moment. And sure enough it came. Mark leaned forward, his elbows on the table. Mom, we've been thinking about the future. You're not getting any younger and, well, it's time we got serious about your estate. Sarah nodded quickly. His mom. You need to have everything in writing. The house, the savings, the valuables. It's only fair that we know what to expect so there are no fights later. Daniel, blunt as ever, added, exactly. We just want to make sure it all stays in the family. That's what Dad would have wanted. The words stung, but I held my composure. They spoke of fairness, of family, but their eyes gleamed with greed. Not one of them mentioned love. Not one of them mentioned care. I set my fork down slowly, the sound of metal on china echoing through the room. Interesting, I said softly. You want to talk about the future? They nodded eagerly. Then let's talk about the past first. Silence fell. Sarah's smile faltered. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Mark raised his brows, confused but still confident. I took a deep breath. Do you remember my birthday? Their eyes darted between each other. Mark cleared his throat. Of course, Mom. We celebrated together. No, I said firmly. You celebrated without me. Do you remember where I was that night? The room grew tense. Sarah opened her mouth, then closed it. Daniel looked away. Mark tried to laugh it off. Come on, Mom, it was just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? My voice trembled with anger now. I sat alone at a restaurant for 3 hours. I waited for you. I had a cake with me, one I ordered just for us. And while I sat there, humiliated, you were all together in Sarah's house, smiling for photos, cutting another cake and pretending it was for me. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint clinking of glasses as one of the children knocked against the table. I reached into my bag and pulled out the printed photos, the very ones Sarah had posted online. I laid them down on the table one by one. Their smiling faces. Their happy poses. The banner that read "Happy Birthday, Mom," while I sat miles away in tears. This, I said, my voice steady now, wasn't just about forgetting me. It was about choosing to erase me. About making me invisible in my own life. Sarah's face turned pale. Mom, it wasn't like that. I cut her off. Don't you dare try to explain this away. For years I gave everything I had for you. I worked myself to the bone to give you opportunities one never had. I sacrificed my happiness, my health, even my memories, all so you could have more. And what did you give me in return? Silence. Neglect. Betrayal. Mark tried to speak, but I raised a hand. No. You will listen. They froze. For the first time in years I saw fear in their eyes. Not fear of me, but of what they knew was coming. I came here tonight, I continued, because I wanted to look you in the eye when I told you the truth. You think you're entitled to my home, my money, my belongings. You think I exist only to leave you something when I die. But you're wrong. Everything I own, everything I've built has already been spoken for. And none of it will go to you. The words hung in the air like a storm. Sarah gasped. Daniel slammed his hand on the table. What? That's insane, Mom. We're your children. Mark's voice rose, trembling with anger. You can't do that. We deserve it. It's ours by right. I leaned forward, my eyes burning into theirs. You don't deserve anything. You couldn't even give me the dignity of your presence on my birthday. If I meant so little to you alive, why should I mean anything to you after I'm gone? The room exploded. Sarah cried. Mom, please, you don't understand. Daniel shouted. This isn't fair. Mark stood, his face red. You'll regret this. But I didn't waver. For the first time in my life I was not begging for their love, not pleading for their attention. I was standing on my own terms. You may hate me for this, I said, my voice calm again, but one day you'll realize. You lost not just an inheritance. You lost a mother who gave you everything. And that loss is something no amount of money will ever replace. With that I rose from the table. My hands trembled, but my back was straight. I walked to the door, the weight of years lifting with each step. Behind me I heard chaos, shouts, cries, desperate pleas. But I didn't turn back. Not once. Because my revenge was not in punishing them. It was in showing them what they had thrown away. And that night, as I stepped into the cool darkness, I felt freer than I had in decades. The night I walked out of Mark's house, I didn't look back. The air outside was cool and still, and for the first time in years I felt like I could breathe. My heart was pounding, my hands were trembling, but my spirit felt unshackled. I had finally spoken the truth they had spent years ignoring. When I arrived home, the house felt different. It wasn't larger or brighter, but the silence that once suffocated me now felt like peace. I set down my bag, took off my shoes, and stood in the living room, letting the stillness wrap around me. I wasn't alone anymore. I had myself. That night, I cut the first slice of the birthday cake still sitting in the freezer. The one I had carried home from the restaurant. I lit a candle, just one, and whispered, "Happy birthday" to me. As the flame flickered, I realized something powerful. Even if no one else celebrated me, I could celebrate myself. The days that followed were quiet but purposeful. My children bombarded me with calls, messages, and even visits at the door. At first they were angry. Daniel shouted into the phone, accusing me of betrayal. Sarah cried, begging me to reconsider. Mark demanded meetings, insisting he had a right to know every detail. But I didn't answer their calls. I didn't open my door. I let the silence speak for me. Weeks turned into months. Slowly the noise died down. They stopped calling, stopped visiting. Their absence, once my greatest fear, became my greatest relief. In that newfound space I began to live again. Mrs. Patel often invited me over for tea, her warmth filling the empty corners of my heart. We would sit in her garden, surrounded by the scent of roses and jasmine, and laugh about little things. The weather, the neighbor's dog, recipes that reminded us of our mothers. She treated me not as a burden or a bank but as a friend. I also began volunteering at the community center. At first I thought I would only help with small tasks, but soon I was teaching cooking classes for young mothers struggling to make ends meet. Their gratitude, their smiles, their eagerness to learn. It was the kind of appreciation I had starved for all my life. One of them hugged me after class and said, "You remind me of my mom. Thank you for caring." My eyes welled with tears. In that moment I realized that family isn't just blood. Family is love, respect, and presence. The more I gave to those who valued me, the more alive I felt. I celebrated holidays with neighbors, attended birthdays with friends from the center, and built connections with people who didn't see me as a means to an end. Slowly, the hole my children left in my heart began to heal. When the next birthday rolled around, I did something different. I booked the same restaurant, the one where I had once sat alone. But this time I didn't wait for people who would never come. Instead, I invited those who had become my real family. Mrs. Patel was there, smiling proudly beside me. The young mothers from the community center came with their children, filling the table with laughter and chaos. Even the restaurant staff remembered me, and this time, their pity had turned into admiration. When the cake arrived, lit with candles, the entire room joined in singing. "Happy birthday, dear Mary." The sound washed over me like sunlight after a storm. I closed my eyes, made a wish, and blew out the candles, not wishing for my children to return, but for the strength to keep living without them. And I had that strength now. Of course, there were moments of pain. Sometimes I would see a family walking together and feel a pang of loss. Sometimes, I missed the way my children's voices sounded when they were little, full of innocence and love before greed poisoned them. But then I reminded myself, I had given them everything. It wasn't my failure that they had chosen betrayal. It was theirs. The will remained as I had arranged it. Half to charity, half to Mrs. Patel. My children would inherit nothing. Not because I wanted revenge, but because they had shown me time and time again that they didn't deserve it. My legacy would go where it would be cherished, not squandered. And so I found freedom. Not in riches or possessions, but in letting go of the chains that bound me to people who didn't value me. My revenge was never about taking from them. It was about showing them what they had lost. In the end, I was no longer the woman who sat alone at a restaurant, waiting for love that would never arrive. I was the woman who stood up, walked away, and found love where it truly lived. As I looked around that restaurant on my birthday, surrounded by laughter, I whispered to myself, "This is my family. This is my peace." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed it.